Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast. I'm Paul. That's Ben.
Hey,
And this is everything you need to know about the state of fantasy Formula One and a lot of things about the state of real world Formula One leading up to the 2025 Japanese Grand Prix. To know where we're going, we first looked where we've been. So far, we've been to Australia and we've been to China. And things are not as straightforward as they have been in years past, specifically with Ferrari getting disqualified. Rookies are in the top 10. And Yuki Tsunoda might be getting promoted to Red Bull Actual.
almost nothing is clear.
Yeah.
McLaren is doing great. Good for them. Mercedes is doing just
Kimi
fine.
Antonelli's putting up like 30 points a race, 30
Yeah.
points a weekend right now, and he's a rookie.
Yeah,
Like,
and again, I think most of the story fodder is, man, like this is the roughest season for rookies in years, and that's not
yeah,
inaccurate. But no one told Kimmy.
no,
He's
no, he's
he's
doing
uh he's
fine.
cruising. I think the two biggest talking points of the week are what happened to Ferrari and the Liam Lawson Yuki Tsunoda speculation.
I think from a tactics perspective, it's the right way to go. Yuki hasn't been in a Red Bull before. You can't do worse than P19 and P20. You might as well. You have nothing to lose by swapping them out. You have everything to gain. Liam Lawson truly doesn't have an answer for how hard the Red Bull is to drive. Then why not swap him out? I don't think it would be a bad thing to do. And it's only two races in, so you still have enough time to stay in the fight for the constructor hunt.
I don't disagree with you, but for argument's sake, here are the mulligans I'll give Liam Lawson.
Okay.
One, while not exactly a rookie, he's got exactly 11 races under his belt, so he's still pretty green.
Yeah.
And that's over the course of maybe 3 seasons. Week one was just a mess for everyone across the board. So I'm
True.
willing to scratch that.
I agree with you there.
I know there was an article as well on F1.com talking about the preseason practice period for Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen, where there's 3 total days, and rather than having them go back and forth and trade off drive time, they gave Liam Lawson a day and a half and they gave Max Verstappen a day and a half. And while maybe some concentrated time is good, that cadence gives them a little bit less of a break in between driving sessions to
Yeah.
analyze what they're doing or to compare against each other. I think there are a couple of things stacked against Liam right now that I would tend to give him at least one more week to kind of figure things out, especially given the appearance that the car is tuned to Max Verstappen's unique skill set,
Yeah.
preferences, driving style that no one else really seems to have. Otherwise, you're going to find the exact same thing happens with Yuki Tsunoda in a Red Bull car. I don't think it's so much of who's in the driver's seat so much as the lack of tuning to that driver's specific needs.
No, that could very well be because here's a thought experiment. What happens if Yuki Tsunoda also gets P20?
Sure.
Do you keep him in it? And as soon as you do, then it's like, all right, so you give Liam Lawson, to your point, one righteous race and it doesn't pan out, or righteous
Right.
race in a sprint, it doesn't pan out, and you swap him out for Tsunoda, it doesn't work out for him. Well, then who do you keep there?
In terms of driver mentality, it seems that when Yuki Tsunoda gets stressed out, he gets flustered. Liam Lawson, when he gets stressed out, he gets a little reckless, but he's aggressive. If you're going to err on one side as a Formula One driver, you err on the side of pushing a little harder, being a little bit
Yeah.
reckless, being aggressive, and not losing your nerve.
Yeah, Yuki Tsunoda yells, Liam Lawson flips off Sergio Perez as he's driving
Correct.
by, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got these like the slow motion Luigi Mario Kart gif, if I can
Right.
find that. Yeah, where he's got some evil in his eyes. Now, that being said, do I think they did Yuki Tsunoda dirty by not giving him a chance at Red Bull at the start of the season?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd love to see him, have his shot.
I don't know. I guess it might come down to what Red Bull's thinking logic wise as far as the rest of the season. If they're not touching the Red Bull car anymore,
Yeah.
then all right, put it in somebody, see who can figure it out. But if they are touching the Red Bull car, they're willing to provide upgrades, then you put the upgrades to help it get to wherever Liam Lawson needs it to go.
Let's
And
go. Let's talk a double DQ for Ferrari.
new this season, it's negative 20 instead of negative 25 points for disqualification.
hmm
But the constructor also gets an additional negative 10 points on top of the negative 20 when a driver disqualifies. So if your driver gets disqualified, driver suffers a negative 20, the constructor suffers that negative 20 as well, and the constructor also gets another negative 10. So disqualifications zeroes out your points for the race and gives you negative 50 points total if you have that
Jeez.
driver on your team as well. So I took negative 60 on the constructor because both negative 20s and both negative 10s, and then the negative 20 for Lewis Hamilton. So I
Jeez.
had negative 80 points in addition to all the points being zeroed out. It was over a 100-point swing
Oh man.
because of that double DNF. So let's start with Charles Leclerc. So
Yeah.
everybody going into the race thought they were going to do a two-stop strategy. Majority of the field, all except two, started out on medium tires, planning to go shift to the hard around lap 15 or 20,
Yeah.
and then take those towards the end. When the second round of pit stops came in, they'd shift back to the medium and sprint it to the end. Well, two drivers did the opposite. They started out on the hards, praying for a safety car or a red flag or some sort of intervention.
Sure.
One of them was Lance Stroll. He started out on the hards, and he just, as long as his tires were fine, he just didn't go into the pits.
Yeah.
And he ended up driving like 30 something laps on these hard tires. So all the other teams are watching him and they're like, oh, we can go that long with, if he can go, 35 or 40 laps, we can go further. Then, so they went ahead and everyone kind of took the mediums a little bit long, did one stop, shifted into hards, and then majority, like three quarters of the field didn't do a second stop. And this is something I didn't know until I was doing research for this episode and in the wake of this. They factor into the car's weight how much rubber is lost off their tires during degradation to make sure the cars barely are overweight at the end of the race.
I don't like that. I'm sorry.
It's
If you've got a consumable, that will lose mass, the fact that you have to consider that in terms of crossing the finish line, I think that's a
and
little silly. Like how is someone supposed to exploit that? Like what exploitation are they protecting from by factoring in the weight of tire degradation over the course of the race? No one pulls an advantage from that, do they?
so Julian Palmer on F1.com, F1 TV. I mean, if anybody hasn't seen it. So I'm just parroting and understanding what he said.
Okay.
It's not FIA directives that are doing it, it's the teams. Because for every kilogram you carry around the track, it's like 5/100ths of a second per lap.
Yeah.
Multiplied over the whole race, that's like 2 seconds or something.
Yeah.
So what these teams do is they take, when it comes to their whatever their weights are they put in the nose or with their fuel or however they do their weight and balance of these cars, they take it, if they have to be over like 800 kilograms at the end of the race, they will factor into it tire degradation, fuel burn, all of this, and do the weights out so they finish 800.1 kilograms over at a weight of 800.1 kilograms at the end of the race.
Sure.
Because as soon as they finish at 800.2, then that means that they're going to be like a second slower, or they could have lost that extra 0.1 kilograms and been a second faster over the whole race.
Got it.
And so they end up working down those numbers to that level. And there's a lot of people that have paid some major bonk to do it.
No kidding.
And the counterpoint to this is that there are plenty of other teams that also did the same strategy that weren't underweight. And so what Julian Palmer believes is that they miscalculated just by a littlest bit, and that was that. For Lewis Hamilton, they have this, it used to be wood, now it's some sort of composite plate. And you know how at the start of the rate, you always see the cars throwing sparks.
Sure.
So the closer to the ground you get, the faster you go. And what they started doing was to keep teams from basically dragging their car until the ride height increases naturally because of fuel loss, fuel burn. They put the skid plates and you can't skid too much. What happened was Ferrari judged it a little off and they were a little bit too low at the beginning and they wore off too much of that skid plate at the beginning of the race before the fuel burned up because they wanted to be that millimeter low. If they had just been like a millimeter higher, they would have, again, lost 1 or 2 seconds over the course of the race, but been within limits. So they just miscalculated the littlest bit. And all the teams do this, from the best of my knowledge.
Oh, for sure.
All the teams do this. They just miscalculated twice, and there you have it.
You and I both have kids. Whenever we get that argument of like, well, I'm never going to use this in real life, No, you become a mathematician for a Formula One team. There's money to be had there, and all the silliest math questions you could ever think of will be asked. And so it's good to know how to do this stuff.
I'm no athlete, all right? I'm married to one. Athletes everywhere are always like, all right, how do you get that every little bit of advantage, right? Everything I could do to maximize my
Sure.
performance.
And that
My,
was that was I think as succinct as you can get with this kind of discussion. So well done.
Thank you. That's at least how I understand it. George Russell and Mercedes. I know we already talked about him, but no one's hyping up George Russell, not even George Russell. No one's hyping up Kimi Antonelli. He's just placing fifth and sixth consistently.
Yeah.
Like outside, if you watch actual F1 coverage, no one's going, man, Mercedes is doing great.
Of course, this is a way too soon analysis and a way too soon labeling of things. But right now, Kimi Antonelli is last year's George Russell. And I would say George Russell this year is last year's Charles Leclerc.
Yeah,
Where
I'll go with that.
everyone's looking at Max Verstappen. Everyone was looking at Sergio Perez's, slow downfall, which hadn't started yet at this point last year. There was a lot to look at besides Charles Leclerc, who's just consistently turning in good show after good show after
Yep.
good show, even because everyone else is looking at Carlos Sainz to see how he does in the wake of his appendicitis and his lack of future plan clarity.
Sure.
With Ferrari, is it too soon to bail on them or to panic about them? Because you got two great drivers. You had a crazy week one for everybody. Freak gamble non-payoff in week two. Is Ferrari a problem, or is it, man, what a bad start, but they're going to be just fine?
My hang up with Ferrari is okay. So Lewis Hamilton won, good for him. Charles Leclerc came in fifth on
And this
merit
is
in the sprint.
in the sprints,
In the
yeah.
sprints, the starting grid was Lewis Hamilton in fifth, Ferrari in sixth. But look who's above him: George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. I don't think he did so hot and
Kimi
qualified.
starts at 8.
Eight, yeah, there is eight. And how do you do for the sprint grid? Kimi Antonelli starts at 7, and George Russell starts at 5. So the points get exponential in the top 3.
Yes.
And right now, Lewis Hamilton for a Grand Prix, Ferrari isn't in the top 3.
No.
George Russell is. So I'm not saying divest of them just to get rid of them. I'm saying divest of Ferrari to get Mercedes. Mercedes is going up in value, and Ferrari, wherever they went, is dropping in value. So as soon as this goes one more week, you won't be able to get Mercedes on your team.
No, that's a great point.
Ferrari, that delta is going to grow, and you won't be able to get out. Eventually, when Ferrari starts to get their stuff together, they're going to displace somebody. As long as they don't displace George Russell, as long as they displace Max Verstappen, then you're still fine. You can get onto him later.
This is not like, well, they just happened to do good because Ferrari did badly. No, they were already peers in terms of performance.
Yeah.
I think down the road there's a lot to be excited about with Ferrari, but it has not emerged yet. So
at least from a fantasy perspective. Here, yeah, let's go and take a look at how. So this is at the Chinese Grand Prix. Yeah, look at that. Let's take a look at your team here.
Yeah, so that's full Mercedes and Williams, and I got 190 points out of that. That's without two solid constructors.
And that's also with Fernando Alonso getting
Fernando Alonso.
He had a brake fire. Like, come on, man. So it is possible to get Mercedes, McLaren, and George Russell all on one team.
Yeah.
But it won't be this way long because he's climbing, and the way you have to have the chaff to get to the wheat. And with these prices dropping, like,
that's a cool build, though. I like that a lot. Build.
But I went ahead and got Lawson and Tsunoda and Racing Bulls and Red Bull. I got all the Red Bulls. If they figure it out, this team is going to ride or die with Red Bull for these next few weeks.
Whew. Okay.
And it's a bold strategy. If this swap doesn't work, I'm going to use my wild card and shift all of these onto a McLaren Mercedes plan.
If Tsunoda becomes Red Bull, 2 questions. Because it's the driver himself.
Yeah.
Do you retain that driver? Yeah. Yeah. He was on Haas and what's it called? Ferrari.
Ferrari. His value when he was 15 million or whatever when he raced for Ferrari, his value jumped. Later that season, he came back into drive for Haas. His value stayed the same.
Did it?
It did not change.
That's silly.
So
though.
the value doesn't.
but how many people took him at that price
Oh,
point?
no one. I'm keeping it this way because these two will swap. Yuki and Lawson will swap seats. As soon as Lawson's able to get a top 10 and Tsunoda's able to get a top 10 out of it, there's a non-zero chance that this becomes a very, very, very valuable team. And it's worth the one build with the 1 or 2 weeks for me to figure this out.
This is such a cool experiment. I feel like, did you watch Breaking Bad?
No, I didn't. I want to.
Okay.
It's on my list, but I haven't.
There's a
seen
guy
it.
named Jesse, and he was like, doesn't get the complex stuff that's going on as they're cooking meth, but he's like, yeah, science, you know. And I feel like exactly like that's what this is, because like in the next week, this team will look exactly the same, but also wildly different, and all the implications for the exact same team will be wildly different. So this is the one to watch. Like if all of the rest of the stuff that we talked about was gibberish, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Just like a case study on the world of Red Bull and racing bulls and V-Carb and Baby RB and Yuki and Honda, and just what a weird petri dish of variables, because this is crazy stuff.
For this guy, it's Kimi Antonelli. I didn't afford, because I had taken some losses with the other guys. I couldn't afford George Russell, so I got Kimi Antonelli.
I mean, that's okay. Kimmy's solid.
He is.
And again, if you have McLaren, they've got what, like a 1-5 finish and then a 1-2 finish.
Yeah.
With alternating Grand Prix winners after 2 weeks. Come on. If you can afford McLaren and Mercedes, dude, scrape the bottom of the barrel elsewhere. This is the build right here.
Absolutely.
So like,
absolutely.
yeah, like if I was ranking your builds, OMG 1 makes sense. OMG 2, smartest build ever, and OMG 3, just let me get my bucket of popcorn and watch what's going on. This is you're running the gamut. This is a cool trio of teams.
We're gonna tune in to F1 Live and see how they're doing. So
sure, yeah.
After all races, Laura Winter used her Limitless last week. Then Lawrence Barretto, what did he do? Again, man, Ferrari, man, just burning.
Yeah.
Just hurting everybody. But he took no negative. There we go.
Oh, that saved him.
Yeah. And then Julian Palmer, who gives us who I steal all the great analysis from. See, he believes in Carlos Sainz as well.
But the two, yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, I guess that worked out.
Yeah. And then Ruth Buscombe-Davey, the actual F1 strategist, she believes in Alpine.
Really? Alpine and Williams as your constructors. How do you? I don't think it's so much Alpine, so much as she believes in Williams and Norris. You know, and given how expensive Norris was, that's the best you can do. So
that's true.
She took the best possible, the most expensive driver, and then she went full on the best lower tier team she could afford, and then filled in the blanks from there, I think is what happened.
That makes sense. And that could work out, because Williams, we were expecting to be competitive. I was expecting to be competitive with Mercedes points wise as soon as Sainz showed up. Yeah. Brundle wasn't in for the first race. He went with Mercedes. Okay. So man, Ferrari just, and this makes me feel better. The fact that the professionals, the people whose job it is to talk and live this stuff, they went with Ferrari just as much as we did.
I mean, but how often does Ferrari double out?
They don't.
You know, so again, a lot of this is definitely a freak incident element, and again, they'll be back. They're going to do great as the season goes on, but this is just a horrible start.
That's rough. All right, well, that's all I have. Do you have any parting shots for saved rounds?
We'll see you after Japan. Put some faith in Mercedes, and grab your popcorn for the Red Bull shakeup.
There we go.
All right, take care.